The gymnasium fell silent as the lights dimmed. It was a special day at Crestwood High. A day that would be different from any other. The school had invited Sergeant James Carter, a war veteran, to speak at the assembly. His name was known for bravery, sacrifice, and resilience, and his reputation had preceded him. The principal introduced Sergeant Carter with high praise. "His story is one of incredible dedication to our country," the principal said. "He's faced dark times and emerged stronger. Today we're honored to hear from him firsthand." The students sat in quiet anticipation, eager to hear from the hero they had only read about in the headlines. Most knew his military honors and acts of bravery, but what they didn't know was the deep personal loss and pain he had faced. His resilience went beyond just surviving battles. The staff was excited, expecting the students to feel motivated and proud of the man who served their country. But what they didn't expect was how this speech would take an unexpected turn, one that would change everything for the students. As Sergeant Carter made his way to the podium, the room fell into complete silence. His calm, confident presence was that of a man who had endured hardships beyond imagination. He paused, his eyes scanning the room, taking in the expectant faces of the students. The principal gave a final nod, signaling that it was time for Sergeant Carter to speak. He cleared his throat and began. "My name is James Carter," he said, his voice low but clear. "I served in the military for over 20 years, and in those years I learned more than I could have ever imagined about true strength." His words were simple, grounded in his experiences, but there was an undeniable authority in them. "In the military," he continued, "you learn that the biggest battles aren't fought with weapons, but with the people beside you. Your comrades become your family, your brothers and sisters." The students listened closely, captivated by the calm but firm tone of his voice. He spoke of the deep bonds formed with his fellow soldiers, how they relied on each other in the most dangerous situations, and the sacrifices made for one another. Sometimes, he paused, the hardest choice isn't fighting the enemy, it's deciding to keep going when you don't think you can anymore. But you do it because of the people standing beside you. Many students, particularly those who felt lost or uncertain, found comfort in his words. His story wasn't just about war, it was about facing challenges and finding strength when it seems impossible. It felt real, and they began to see their own struggles in the light of his experiences. Sergeant Carter paused, his gaze drifting down as if gathering his thoughts. The room became still, the students sensing that what came next would be difficult for him. After a deep breath, he spoke again, his voice shaking slightly but steady. "There's one day I'll never forget," he began, his eyes focusing on the distant memory. "It was my second tour in Iraq. We were on a routine patrol, until we got ambushed. Gunfire from every direction, chaos everywhere." He paused, his expression distant. "In the midst of that chaos, I lost my best friend Alex. We had been through everything together. From basic training to our first deployment, he was my brother." The words lingered in the air, the weight of his loss settling heavily over the room. The students could see the raw pain in his eyes as he spoke. His voice cracked for the first time. "He took a bullet for me. A bullet meant for me. And I couldn't do anything. He died in my arms." The room was completely silent now. The students, many of whom had never known such deep loss, were captivated by the vulnerability in his voice. Some wiped away tears, imagining the heartache of losing someone so close, someone who had given his life to save another. Sergeant Carter paused, his throat tightening as the memory threatened to overwhelm him. "After that day everything changed," he continued softly. "I couldn't escape the guilt. The survivor's guilt. I kept asking myself, why me? Why did I survive when Alex didn't?" He ran a hand through his hair, his face filled with pain. "Coming back home, I couldn't fit in. Everything felt insignificant. People complained about things that seemed so small compared to what I had seen, what I had lost. I felt like I was in a place no one could understand. I was angry, distant, and couldn't shake the feeling that I didn't deserve to be here while my best friend was gone." The room grew heavy with silence, the weight of his words sinking in. Every student seemed to hold their breath, absorbing the depth of his emotion. Some shifted uncomfortably, others remained still, their eyes fixed on the man who had bared his soul. Sergeant Carter's eyes welled up, but he pushed through. "It wasn't until years later, long after the war, that I realized something. I couldn't change the past. I couldn't bring Alex back, but I could honor him. I could live a life that would make him proud. And that's what kept me going. The students sat in silence, moved beyond words. The vulnerability, the pain, and the courage to share such a deep part of himself had struck a chord with everyone in the room. There wasn't a single dry eye in the gymnasium now. As Sergeant Carter continued, his voice now calmer but still heavy with emotion, the room remained silent, hanging on every word. He spoke about how he had learned to carry on after the war, to rebuild his life piece by piece. But just as the air seemed to settle, a small hand shot up from the back of the room. The veteran paused mid-sentence, his eyes scanning the crowd. Most of the students had been hanging on his every word, but this one student, a quiet girl sitting near the back, had caught his attention. Her name was Emily. She was the type of student who blended in with the background, often unnoticed, her presence more felt in the way she quietly observed everything around her. Sergeant Carter nodded toward her, a slight smile on his face, although it was a little hesitant. He hadn't expected any questions, especially not from someone so quiet. "Yes, you there," he said, his voice gentle. Emily stood up slowly, her hands gripping the edges of her desk, as though gathering the courage to speak. Her voice, when it came, was soft but clear. "What do you wish you could tell your friend who died, if you could see them one last time?" The question seemed innocent enough. A simple heartfelt query, one that any person might ask after hearing such a painful story. But as the words left her mouth, they hit Sergeant Carter like a wave crashing into the shore. He froze. For a long moment he didn't speak. His eyes closed for a second, his face tightening as if the question had pulled him into a memory so painful, he wasn't sure he could handle it. The room waited, holding its breath, as the veteran struggled to find words, his emotions suddenly overwhelming him once more. The room fell into a heavy expectant silence as Sergeant Carter stood there, his face contorted with emotion. Emily's question had pierced deeper than any of them could have anticipated. It was as though it had reached into a part of him he had buried for so long, a place where the pain was still raw and fresh. He took a slow, shaky breath, trying to steady himself. The words that had come so easily moments before now seemed to evaporate. His hand gripped the podium harder, as if the solid wood could anchor him to this reality, away from the one threatening to drown him. "I wish I could have told him," he began, his voice low, cracking slightly. "I wish I could have told him how much I loved him, how much he meant to me, how much I depended on him, how much we all depended on him." His words faltered as his eyes glazed over, his mind replaying the final moments with Alex, the warmth of his body, as he tried desperately to keep him alive, the way Alex had looked at him with those final pleading eyes. The image was too much, the weight of that loss, too overwhelming. "I'm so sorry." Sergeant Carter's voice shook as he continued. "Sorry I couldn't save you, sorry I couldn't get to you in time. I was right there, and I couldn't protect you." A sob escaped his chest, unbidden. His entire body trembled as the guilt of that moment, the one that had haunted him for years, rose up like a tidal wave crashing through him. The words didn't come anymore. His throat was tight, and his chest felt like it was being crushed under the weight of a burden he had carried alone for far too long. The gymnasium seemed to hold its collective breath, the silence stretching so long it felt suffocating. Sergeant Carter's face turned red, his eyes now glistening with unshed tears, his voice barely audible. "I don't know if I'll ever be able to forgive myself for that, for not being enough, for not saving him." The room, still and heavy, felt like it was suspended in time. No one moved, no one spoke. The students who had seen him as a pillar of strength just moments ago, now saw him as a man, just like them, vulnerable and human. His tears fell freely now, as if the dam had finally broken, flooding the space with the raw emotion he had spent years holding inside. Sergeant Carter didn't try to hide it. He didn't wipe away his tears. For the first time he allowed himself to break down completely in front of an audience, to be fully seen, not as a war hero, but as a man who had suffered, and was still suffering, from the weight of that loss. The students watched, some of them wiping away their own tears, as the man they had once admired for his strength stood before them, broken. It was the most powerful moment of the assembly, a reminder that even the strongest people have their battles, and sometimes, those battles aren't fought on the battlefield, but within the heart. The room remained still, the air thick with emotion. Sergeant Carter stood there, unable to speak, his body trembling with the release of everything he had been holding in for years. His chest heaved with each breath, the weight of his guilt and sorrow almost too much to bear. The vulnerability he had shown, something so rare for a man who had always been the epitome of strength, had left him exposed in a way he never imagined. And then, from the back of the room, Emily slowly stood up. The quiet girl, who had asked the question that had unlocked the floodgates of his grief, now made her way toward him. There was a calmness in her step, a certainty that perhaps only she understood the depth of what he was going through. The students watched her move, unsure of what was about to happen. Would she say something, or would she stay silent, letting the moment unfold on its own? Emily reached the front of the room, and gently placed a hand on Sergeant Carter's arm. The gesture was simple, but in that moment it spoke volumes. She didn't say anything at first, she just stood there beside him, her hand a comforting presence on his arm. Finally she spoke, her voice soft but unwavering. "It's okay to cry," she said, her words cutting through the tension in the air. "You've been strong for so long, but now it's okay to let go." The veteran's eyes met hers, and for the first time since he had begun speaking, a small smile, broken but genuine, appeared on his face. The smile didn't erase the pain, but it allowed something new to blossom within him: acceptance. For the first time in years, he didn't have to hold it together. The floodgates were wide open, and he allowed himself to feel, to mourn the loss of his friend, to feel the sorrow that had lived inside him for so long. His tears flowed freely now, unashamed, unfiltered. It was a release, an exhale of everything he had been carrying alone. Emily's simple words had cracked open something in him that no one else had been able to touch. The students watched in silence, but one by one, several of them stood. It started slowly at first, hesitant, but then it grew, as they realized the magnitude of what had just happened. The room was filled with applause, not for a speech, not for a military accomplishment, but for a man who had shown them the true meaning of strength, the courage to be vulnerable. As the applause grew louder, Sergeant Carter, still overwhelmed by the moment, looked out at the students, his heart full of gratitude for the unexpected connection that had just been made. Sergeant Carter slowly regained his composure, wiping the tears from his eyes, though a lingering trace of emotion still softened his features. He turned to Emily, his voice hoarse but filled with gratitude. "Thank you," he said, his words simple but heartfelt. "Your kindness. It means more than you could ever know." With a deep breath, he looked back at the students, his expression steadying, a trace of that former strength returning. "I think I've said enough about myself, but there's one thing I want you all to remember," he began, his voice calm once again, though still carrying the weight of everything he had shared. "Strength doesn't mean never breaking, it means having the courage to pick yourself back up when you do." The words resonated in the room, a quiet truth that settled over the students like a warm blanket. For many of them, this wasn't just a lesson about resilience in war, it was a lesson about life itself. The things they learned in textbooks could only go so far, but this moment, this raw display of vulnerability and courage, taught them more than any lecture ever could. Sergeant Carter gave them a final smile, one that held more peace than it had before. "No matter how hard life gets, no matter how many times you fall, you are never truly alone," he said softly, his voice firm yet gentle. "You have the power to heal from your pain, to keep moving forward, just like I had to learn to do, and that's where your true strength lies." With that, he took one last look at the room, the students who had watched him break, and now witnessed him rise again, and as he left, he knew they would carry those words with them long after the assembly was over. As the assembly drew to a close, the students sat in stunned silence, their emotions swirling in the wake of what they had just witnessed. The impact of Sergeant Carter's words, his vulnerability, and the rawness of his story lingered in the air like an unspoken promise. This wasn't just another assembly, it was an experience that would stay with them for years to come. When the bell rang, signaling the end of the event, the students slowly filed out of the gym. The usual chatter was absent, the once bustling hallway now felt quieter, more introspective. There was an almost tangible shift in the atmosphere, as if the walls themselves had absorbed the weight of the emotional journey they had all shared. Many of the students walked in pairs or small groups, speaking in hushed tones, reflecting on what they had just heard. Some had tears in their eyes, others with thoughtful expressions, as they carried the lesson of the day in their hearts, that true strength lies not in never breaking, but in the courage to heal and move forward, even when the road feels impossible. Sergeant Carter left the school quietly, his heart full, but his presence still deeply felt. Before he walked out the door, he paused to thank the principal and the staff, his voice steady but filled with sincerity. "Thank you for letting me speak today," he said, his eyes meeting theirs with a depth that spoke volumes. As he left the campus, Sergeant Carter knew that his time there had been more than just a speech. He had shared a piece of his soul, and in return, he had touched the hearts of those who had listened. And in that moment, he realized the true power of his story, not just to heal himself, but to heal others as well. As Sergeant Carter's story unfolds, we're reminded that true strength isn't about never breaking, it's about the courage to rise again after we've fallen. His vulnerability in that moment left an indelible mark on everyone in the room, showing us that healing comes not just from time, but from the willingness to confront our pain, and allow others to see us for who we truly are. If you've been moved by this story, remember you're never alone in your struggles, and you have the strength to heal. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more stories that inspire, challenge, and remind us of the power of human connection. Thank you for watching.